Hello, Pastor Rick, Journey of Faith Baptist Church. I'm glad you stopped by today to visit our site. We're beginning that march towards Resurrection Sunday. I've chosen to limit some of my teaching and comments to just biblical things, just Christ. That's all I want to focus on as we, as a church and as a community, draw near to that Resurrection Sunday, that time of great joy. We must also remember some of the things that took place ahead of time. So with that, I want to ask one question. Why did Jesus stay silent through most of his trial? And other times he did answer questions, but mostly, the majority of the time, he was silent. Let's see if we can answer that in a few ways. When Jesus chose not to stay silent, in other words, when Jesus chose to speak and to answer, it was to demonstrate his authority and his power and who he was. Let's take a quick look at a few things. Mark chapter 14, verses 60 through 62. Let me read these to you. New King James Version. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Well, this just drove the high priest and the Sanhedrin crazy, because now Jesus had said clearly that he was the Son of God, the Messiah, the anointed one of God who had come. You see, when Jesus chose not to stay silent, it was to answer a direct question of who he is. Jesus never downplayed who he is. Jesus never wavered from who he is, just as he's not wavering now from his purpose of going to the cross. You see, Jesus was born for one purpose, and that was to seek and save them, mankind, to save the lost, to be that salvation, that payment for sin. The only way to do that was through the cross. And so from the time Jesus was born, it was a direct path to the cross. And here's Jesus. He is not denying himself to save himself. He is staying focused, and he is saying who he is. And because he says who he is, it actually condemns him. The Sanhedrin now has right to condemn him. And what they condemn him for and what they bring charges against him for are blasphemy. They're saying the charges against Jesus are blasphemy. But when they take him to Pilate, they change the charges, and they say that the charges are now insurrection against Caesar, or by saying that he's a king. This is an absolute kangaroo court, if you even know what that term means. But this is a ridiculous court appearance. A deeper study would show that they're not supposed to have a trial at night. They're not supposed to put a man on trial and pronounce guilt in the same day. There's a lot of Jewish laws that they themselves are breaking in order to bring Jesus to trial. Jesus doesn't deny himself. He tells them exactly who he is. It's a purpose-driven answer. A purpose-driven answer. And that answer is to go to the cross of Calvary. Pilate asked Jesus kind of who he was, and there was two answers. Two times Jesus actually answered him. So I want to share a couple of answers that Jesus did give. In Luke chapter 23, verse 3, then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him and said, "It is as you say." So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." Pilate quickly agreed. He quickly accepted that Jesus was the king of the Jews, which to Pilate meant nothing. It meant nothing to Pilate. But Pilate is about to meet the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And Pilate is unsure how to proceed. There's a lot that takes place till the second time that Jesus is brought before Pilate. I want to share with you these things in John chapter 19. John chapter 19, verses 9 through 11. 8 through 11. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was more afraid, and went again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" He didn't ask him if he was a king. He just said, "Where are you from?" Because Pilate is beginning to believe that Jesus is not from this earth. But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me?" You can just tell that he's rising up in his authority as the governor, as the governor of this area of Judea. That he's rising up in his supposed authority over Jesus. And Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Pilate, from that point on, wants to release Jesus, but he can't. He's stuck and he's into something he can't get out of. He finds out that Jesus is originally from a place called Galilee. And then he remembers, oh, there's this puppet king. His name is Herod, King Herod. And so I'm going to send him to Herod for judgment. He thinks he's out from underneath this mess. He's going to pass the buck off to somebody else, to Herod. The second thing I want us to see is that Jesus stayed silent. And when he did, it was to express God's authority. He stayed silent at times before Pilate to express God's authority, to express his authority over the whole situation. But he never denied who he was, especially when it led to the next step of him getting to the cross. He's the architect. He's in charge. When Jesus stayed silent, it was to express his authority over the whole situation. And there's a lesson here for us as well. Turn with me back to Luke chapter 23. And look at verses 8 and 9. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him. That would be Herod questioning Jesus. He questioned him with many words, but he, that's Jesus, answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood vehemently and accused him. Then Herod and his men of war treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Herod didn't want to meet the Son of God. Herod wanted to see a circus act. And Jesus wasn't about to participate in that. It was way beneath him. So he said nothing. All the time that those chief priests and those of the Sanhedrin accused him over and over and over before Herod, and Jesus said nothing. Sometimes the silence is louder than the words. Jesus showed his authority over the Jews by confirming that he was the Son of God. He showed his authority over Pilate by confirming that he was the King of the Jews. Jesus showed his authority again to Pilate by reminding him that God was in control, not Pilate. And then he showed his authority by remaining silent. By not speaking, Jesus showed us all that he really does have the power. He was controlling the situation by his silence. Third thing I want us to see. Sometimes staying silent is greater than speaking our mind. Sometimes by staying silent, we're demonstrating that God is in control of our lives. When you see something on Facebook that just drives you crazy and you feel like, oh, I'm so angry, I've just got to answer this, and you start typing out stuff and you just, that venom just spews out of you. You're so angry that people could be so foolish. You're losing control. Anything that forces you to do something that you wouldn't do in a rational mind has control over you. When a bully teases kids and stirs up a group of people, he's doing that because he wants control. He wants to demonstrate that he has control and authority. When two people argue and one spouse begins to up the ante in the argument, silence would be golden at this point. But when you jump in and you match that and you up the ante even further, you're not in control. The situation is controlling you. When we're tempted to do these things, to yell or to shout, to scream, gossip, we're demonstrating that we're out of control. When we're silent, we take control over the issue, over the situation. Lastly, when Jesus maintained his silence, it was to fulfill prophecy. It was to fulfill prophecy. Look with me in Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. False accusations, threats of death, they did not change the path that Jesus had. And why is that? Because Jesus left his case in the Father's hands. You see, he knows that the Father will ultimately judge the situation, that he will judge righteously. In other words, he will judge the right things. Jesus left his case in the hands of his Father. And by doing so, he didn't have to answer all the accusations. The Father would judge the accusations. And he knows the Father will judge rightly and that the accusations are false. Therefore, no accusation would stand. There's no need for Jesus to answer these accusations because the Sanhedrin's not in control. Herod's not in control. Pilate's not in control. We would do well when we begin to argue, when we become angry, when we become upset, to simply say, Lord, I'm leaving this in your hands. You choose how you want us to respond. And sometimes the answer will be, shh, be quiet. Take control of the situation. In conclusion, Jesus went silent for many reasons, but he took control from Herod. He took control from the Sanhedrin. He took control from the people who were accusing him by being quiet. You see, when we have to answer every question or every accusation that comes before us, we give them control over our lives. We have to answer Facebook because we're angry. We have to just answer something on social media, whatever platform that is. We give that platform control of who we are. Take control. Be silent. Manage what you're doing the way Jesus managed himself. I'm glad you stopped by today. Pastor Rick, Journey of Faith Baptist Church. Have a blessed day.